My background in biomedical engineering, developing digital products for healthcare, and actually a significant amount of experience in AI development and large language models. You can't just rely on what the AI is telling you right now. These large language models, because they have so much in their brains, they have a problem with hallucinating right now. So you can't just like have your scribe do the thing and then just submit it, right? Especially with the models the way they are currently, the biggest limitation, I think a lot of it comes from two things. First of all, bias in the training data set. And back to our original question, can AI replace healthcare providers? I was at a conference recently, and in the last 2 years at this conference, the biggest message that comes out of it is AI.
Howdy, everyone. Welcome back. We got another episode of A Plate Full of Insights. A really fun episode that we have today. We also got a new face on the podcast today, somebody that if you've watched or listened to our podcast before, would have not seen or heard before. If you are one of those people, perhaps go check out some more of our episodes that we've done in the past. Check out what we're all about here at Revive Wellness. But today I want to intro the new face. So you've seen me before, hopefully, Brandon. You've also seen Matthew before, two dietitians here at Revive Wellness. But the new face, which I am super excited to have on the podcast, is MyViva's, which is the parent company to Revive Wellness. MyViva's director of product development, Nathaniel Maida. Thanks for joining us, Nathaniel.
Thank you for having me.
So the folks haven't seen you before. So the director of product development at MyViva, we work really closely with the product team at MyViva because we use MyViva Plan, a digital health application in our practice at Revive Wellness. We've talked about it many times on the podcast. Nathaniel's kind of at the tippy top of that side of the company, and so we work really closely with him and his team, provide feedback on how people are using it, provide insight to the team, and I know Nathaniel has a ton of insight and is really fun to talk to about things like what we're going to be talking about today, which is the first of a two-part little mini series we have on the use of AI, artificial intelligence. And it's becoming more and more relevant. But today we want to talk about specifically is one thing that I feel like both healthcare providers and people that are, the public have been pondering is, can AI replace healthcare providers? So I am super excited, and what better person to have join us for this conversation than somebody who I feel like on our team is probably one of the best people to talk to about it, in Nathaniel.
Thank you for the intro. I guess to kind of set the stage for why you probably brought me on for this particular topic is my background in biomedical engineering, developing digital products for healthcare, and actually a significant amount of experience in AI development and large language models, which is kind of a lot of what ChatGPT is, and a lot of what people are talking about when they talk about AI these days. I come from the early days of LLMs, so definitely have some insights and experience from there that I can talk about here. So thank you for bringing me on. Very excited. Always happy to talk about this, and very excited about AI and new tech.
Why don't we start, just to be, clear the air, because a lot of people may or may not know what it means, and if they do, maybe not fully. So why don't we start with defining what AI and LLMs actually mean, and what the true meaning of them is, maybe if there is anything that's kind of a misconception in terms of how people define them. But why don't we start there, just to make sure that we're all on the same page?
Sure, definitely. And I noticed the name of the podcast is, Can AI Replace Healthcare Providers? I think you said that, right? So I would I'm not going to answer it until the very end. I'm not going to answer with my perspective, I should say, because there will be lots of perspectives out there, and this is just my experience. So I'm going to put that caveat on everything I say here is just my experience and my perspective from being in the space. So I'm not going to answer that until the end. But to start off, yes, let's define AI and LLMs. Artificial intelligence is in its base definition is just machines thinking, essentially. So doing some sort of thinking and responding. Um, when nowadays AI is really exploded with the introduction of large language models. Um, and large language models are a very advanced version of AI, particularly or applied in the space of language. Some of the early research was looking at various kind of just pattern recognitions in language. And now it's grown so complex since then. And you'll have these large language models that are, we call them parameters of billions upon billions, reaching trillions of parameters of things that, um, of little pieces of memory that the AI is used, that defines the AI's memory effectively. And the earlier days, it would have been millions, and now it's up to trillions. ChatGPT, for example, will be in I can't remember the exact number, but in the hundreds of billions of parameters now. These are huge models. And effectively, what they are is a representation of the human brain. So large language models are built on an AI algorithm called neural networks. Neural being similar to the human brain, and they learn similarly to that too. So when we're so-called training a large language model, when they were training ChatGPT would view hundreds of thousands of millions of conversations in text, and it would remember that in its billions of parameters that make up its neural network. And what it's doing in that neural network is recognizing patterns among the data that it's among the conversations that it's seeing. And that brings us to today. Whenever you talk with ChatGPT, all it's doing is drawing from its memory, recognizing patterns in what you're inputting to it, and then providing that response of what it thinks should be the most accurate response based on the patterns that it's recognizing in the data that it's memorized and in response to the input you're providing it. So basically that's kind of what we talk about when we're talking about large language models. AI itself is much larger than that. There's other algorithms that are being used across healthcare, across business, and worldwide. I mean, ChatGPT is just one of a many algorithms that are define artificial intelligence, but it's the most prominent these days because it has exploded in its use cases and its value to people. Which brings us to now that we've defined it, brings us to healthcare. But before we move into healthcare, does that I mean, Brandon and Matthew, do you have any comments, any thoughts on the definition? Did that make sense?
Yeah, the point about neural networks, I think, is yeah, that makes sense to me. It's trying to replicate the human brain, and I think when I think about like what would allow me to function as a human being on a day-to-day basis, just looking at like the human equivalents, which I think a lot of things tech are built around a lot of stuff that we either see in nature, of course humans being a part of that. um you know, memory is a huge element of that. What based on my prior experience, what decision, what thing should I do here? Which is, I mean, a very relevant similarity between anything that we would ever talk about on this podcast or that we would talk about with our clients. You know, what do we know? And you can really only acquire knowledge based on, you know, memory of some sort. So It's sometimes we get caught in using words for things over time, like AI LLMs, and then you're just, it becomes its own entity, and you forget about all of the kind of stuff behind it. Hearing a definition like that is it's like, oh, it's complex in its makeup, but at the core, it's simple, relatively simple, I think. Anyways, now that's just my perspective. But what do you think, Matthew?
I think that those were nice, simple, and understandable ways of putting it, and seeing that connection to things that we do have a different understanding of, like the human brain. It's a nice analogy or nice connection to make there.
Well, I think it's very important to define it in that way because it's very relevant to the question that we have posed here for this podcast. If we recognize how it's built, we can start to answer that question a little bit better. So that's why I kind of pose it in that way.
I like it. Um, so with that, from what you've seen, and I mean, we've all seen its current use cases in healthcare, both within the healthcare system and then individuals in related to their own health. But I suppose, without going down an extreme rabbit hole, or like probably 20 rabbit holes, broadly, how have you seen AI or LLMs or both being used in healthcare today?
There are so many applications of AI in healthcare, even before LLMs and well, ChatGPT and other similar models became huge. They've only ever since the introduction of those models, it's the use cases have exploded, but there's been a lot of other work going on using neural networks, using other algorithms called like reinforcement learning. Earlier days, it was a lot of its focus would have been on kind of precision health. So one use case is what we call computer vision, where an AI would look at um, medical images and try to recognize patterns in medical images, and then support radiologists in identifying those patterns. Um, and you can see a lot of these when it's applied to healthcare. That's just an example of how AI is being built to support clinicians in their jobs, and that's what these AI tools are built for. Is they're not usually not so much built to replace, but when they actually get into practice, it's much more built to support. So one huge application of LLMs in healthcare is as a note taker, or a what we call a scribe for healthcare providers who are charting, like yourselves. Exactly.
I've seen the potential that is using an AI scribe, and I can't tell you how excited it makes me. And this is just the tippy tip of the iceberg, I would imagine, in terms of how we can use AI in our practice. That's for sure.
That's one that I'm looking forward to. That's simple, but also just going to be such a nice time saver and efficiency boost.
I mean, you can both speak to the efficiency boost as it is. I mean, how much time do you spend, well, charting, and how much time do you think a scribe would save you?
Ask any client that I've worked with, and I mean, if in the past few years where we do more virtual sessions, it's a little bit easier to type notes while you're in a session with the client. But an in-person session, it's a little bit trickier. But the best the best visual I can give somebody of how more efficient it's going to make it for me is, aside from, I can put my attention on the person in the session more so than having to make sure I document everything, because my working memory sometimes, you know doesn't isn't always reliable for being able to document after sessions. I have typed out things and needed to undo blocks of text. It is absolutely atrocious how to watch a stream of undos with looking at like how I was typing something, because it's like, because my brain moves faster than my fingers, so I type stuff, screw up, hit the backspace probably as much as I hit any other key. So at least double. I mean, if you remove, like, yeah, I'm still have to kind of go through it, make sure it's accurate, but it's the it's not only the efficiency piece for me at least. I think it's also the I can not only chart quicker, I can reliably chart quicker while also having my attention in a better place when I'm with a human or a group of humans.
Yeah, and like you said, this is a bigger issue for in-person sessions, as well as I find working with families as well, where it's not just attentiveness when you're speaking with one person, but you're speaking with three, possibly more, and it can interfere both with, like you said, the accuracy and efficiency of what you're doing, being able to have a more connected conversation, a more in-depth conversation, but also, yeah, just so many benefits that come from just that alone without it actually getting to maybe what we'll talk about more later, which is actually assisting with the care itself, not just the documentation piece.
Hmm. Exactly, and and that's it's great you brought that up because that's also now a big piece of where the field is heading. Is the amount of data that we collect in healthcare is monumental, and um, providers and companies and organizations are starting to realize the power of the data that they have and how it could be used to improve care and support the clinician in improving care and both support the patient in improving care for themselves as well. So um, a big piece of this is collecting all that data, recognizing patterns in that data, and then applying that into new patients and to support providers in diagnosing and treating patients and providing plans and care plans for their patients. So I'd say that's another big use case. There's so much more that we could go into, but from a healthcare provider perspective, these are kind of the main ones of these how these tools support them. But I think you bring up a good point though too, or another good point we should bring up is that you can't just rely on what the AI is telling you right now. These large language models, because they have so much in their brains, they have a problem with hallucinating right now. So you can't just like have your scribe do the thing and then just submit it, right? And just have that be part of the chart. No, you need to review that. There needs to be human in the loop. When in the AI world, we call it a human in the loop to ensure that the result is safe and accurate and validated.
Yeah, I like to think of it. I mean, no matter what people are using it for, I think, and even in our case, I think of it as like if I had another human right beside me and I was telling them what to do, I could probably say that whatever AI tool I'm going to use is probably more reliable in its output, meaning I can tell it the same thing repeatedly, and there may be some minor differences in what it spits out, but it's pretty reliable in that like what it needs to do for me based on my use case. It's not going to depend on how much sleep it got or what mood it's in yet, anyway, or any of those types of things. But like much like if I'm working with another human, like there is different insight and knowledge of whatever the patient or patients in front of us, and so we or whatever we're using it for. So it's not a, I mean, it's more of a potential stab at somebody. If I'm working with another human on the same patient and I need to double check their work, they're going to go, well, do you not trust me? But it's not necessarily like, it's not that. I just need to make sure that we're doing best by the human that we're trying to provide care for. AI stuff's really no different. Just because it's computer doesn't mean that we need to be any less weary of checking for errors and things. I could argue it makes the less silly human like errors, but it could still make errors, and errors obviously are not great to have.
Exactly. I mean, to your point, it like any human, it's only able to provide advice and perform based on its previous data. So,
Yeah. Um, this is let's go into this next piece here. This is fun. So we kind of understand a large and at large and broadly how it may be used, how it's defined. we're spoiler alert. We're gonna have a part two where we talk about the do's and don'ts. So we may get into a bit of this because in some cases it's understanding how people are using it. You can't really talk about that without taking one step down the path of making it quite obvious what is or is not a good way to use AI. But nonetheless, uh, Matthew, have you seen anything specific yet, either with your clients or what you've seen online, social media, whatever else may be the case, in terms of what people may be using it for, um, in a more outpatient or private setting like Revive?
Yes, so starting with more private practice or outpatient counseling for nutrition, there are a few key areas where I've seen it being used more often. So, for example, one is going to be things like generating meal plans to suggest, just plans for different meals and snacks during the day. I'd say often, most often in the area of weight loss or weight counseling, where someone wants to generate a plan to make sure that they're getting a certain, let's say, calorie target or just an amount to lose weight. Some apps and some people use it for things like analyzing food diaries. So trying to find certain patterns in the data that I guess the human is providing it to the app or to the device to analyze their food diaries for either it be certain, let's say, yeah, again, it's meeting certain targets when it comes to goals like weight loss, or it could be for certain nutrient targets. There are also some that I've tried out myself or been involved in testing for, where what it really does is it's trying to make those food diaries and nutrition analysis easier by using things like pictures. So you take a picture of a meal or a certain food with your phone, and then based on the what the app detects, it tries to do a nutrition analysis based off of what it detects to make things easier for you, so you're not, for example, like manually adding foods into an app and then manually looking at all the numbers afterwards and things like that. So I'd say those are the most common ones I've seen so far.
I would agree. I would agree. Like it's the probably stereotypical elements of what people may use any tool for in the nutrition and lifestyle space: tracking and generating meal plans. I mean, why would people not use it for a similar thing than what they literally come to us for all the time? Can you make me a meal plan and can you analyze my intake? So naturally, people are going to go down that path. I feel like it makes sense to me why they would do that.
Yeah. And alongside those uses, I would say that there are also some potential issues that can come along with it, which I can get into next.
Yeah.
So, for example, so going with one that, yeah, I've used more in depth myself with trying to, again, detect foods and calculate the intake from pictures and such. Some issues that I've seen with those in my own testing are just issues with detecting the food in itself, which is very variable in accuracy from app to app and with future iterations making updates and stuff. But what I've seen tends to interfere with accuracy is going to be things as simple as like the type of plate that you're using. Where if, let's say, you have a plate that has higher contrast with the type of food that you're trying to detect, it can give you better results if there's higher contrast, worse results if there's worse contrast. In some of my testing, I use as a high contrast option. I have these blue plates where, yeah, they don't match the color of any. It's not like a deep blue like a blueberry, but a very light one where basically no food is that color. In that context, it works quite well, but nobody has that. And I did that for some of the aspects of just testing these areas of accuracy. Other things that are going to be dependent are like what phone you have and what camera it has, what are like the default like brightness settings on it, things like that. What what types of foods do you generally eat? Are you having more mixed dishes? Are you having dishes that are more like individual items where it will perform better? So I would say that with a lot of these things, we're still quite far away from it being as accurate as like manually adding in information, but it is a great efficiency boost, especially if you are eating more so like individual items or individual foods that have a very specific particular appearance. It's going to be better there. I've also seen issues in accuracy when it comes even just to the nutrition info of the food. So some of these apps will also have things like barcode scanners, where not really an AI feature, but it's just a barcode scanner that lets you enter the food that way. Some of these entries are not always accurate, where the thing that comes up will not match the thing that's on the package in front of you. And there can be issues with that side as well when it comes to accuracy. So I'd say we're getting there in those uses, but still some major issues based on the types of foods that you eat, the color of plates that you have at home, and other factors like that.
Note to self: go buy blue plates. I don't think I've ever seen a blue plate outside of the context of party, like the disposable plates you get at birthday parties. I ever seen a blue plate? Not, yeah, that's tricky. Think too, like if you take a picture of a burrito, could be a burrito, it could be a wrap. Who knows what's inside it? Uh, it's definitely, I think, in many cases, and I think I've seen this a lot in the different tools that people could use. Trackers is a pretty good example of such a thing, where it's easier to track certain types of foods than others, and certain people will make decisions on what they do or do not consume based on the simplicity of tracking it. Bodybuilding community is notorious for this. Chicken, broccoli, and rice. It's easy to prepare, it's easy to weigh, it's easy to track. There's a lot of efficiencies to gain from there. Well, that's one of the main reasons why they do it. There's probably others, but it, it poses a big challenge for folks that talk a lot about this. There's probably countless. I don't even know how many YouTube videos are probably available for this type of stuff in the nutrition space now. But it sets a weird precedent for people and a weird example for people that are like everyday living humans that are not, that are living pretty average lives, busy working, doing whatever. They don't have a lot of time. They may not want to eat the same thing all the time. They may think that, oh, I can use these tools and it'll perform the exact same way. Not, not always the case, and really challenging place to be sometimes for us when we have to be the ones to go, that's not, yeah, but not when you're eating this type of food all the time. But then it's tempting to sometimes make those decisions for, like, it would make tracking easier if I ate a certain way, but that's not realistic, and it's a tough point to be in terms of sustainability of somebody's nutrition or lifestyle strategies. So, but I mean, I think about 5-10 years ago where things were at. It was like anything to take us away from MyFitnessPal and like the standard tracking apps, where it's like, this is all we got, or like an app that spits out a meal plan that is so generic and not at all tailored to the human that's using it. Any step forward from there is a positive step, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think just a couple of thoughts on that. I think like there are some great use cases, as you pointed out, and it's rapidly improving in accuracy. Um, and it's come a long ways, like you've said, especially when it comes to personalization. Personalizing a lot of this advice into to the individual, which is quite powerful for individuals trying to take control of their health, trying to improve their health, um, and personalized advice that can be provided to guidance that can be provided to the healthcare provider who's providing care to the patient too, to the person. But you've noted a bunch of limitations of it, and that is I'd like to kind of build on that a bit. It's something to be very aware of when interpreting these things. I know the next podcast is do's and don'ts, so we'll talk more about that. But it should be noted here that there's still significant bias in these models. So when you're talking about these limitations of it only recognizes certain foods in certain states, it's highly dependent. Again, it's just like any human, it's highly dependent on the data that was provided, and its bias when it's providing an answer to you or a result to you is highly biased towards the data that it was trained on. Now these models are getting better and better as they get more data trained into them, or as data or as training strategies become more and more sophisticated. But especially with the models the way they are currently, the biggest limitation, I think, a lot of it comes from two things. First of all, bias in the training data set, and inputs. So, and these two things overlap. So when you're inputting data into, or inputs into the model, you're asking the model for something. You're asking ChatGPT for some advice. It's going to make a whole bunch of assumptions when you provide that input based on the data that it's been trained on, which is a ton of data, but we don't know exactly what pattern it's recognizing when you put that input in, and assumptions that it's made along the way in identifying that pattern, providing that advice back to you. And same with the pictures too, right? It's going to be biased towards certain pictures that it was trained on. And that's probably, like I said, that's the biggest limitation or that's the biggest issue with these current models, that these limitations come from. And a big problem with AI and LLMs, and especially LLMs, large language models right now, is explainability. We have very little idea what is happening in that, amongst those billions of parameters that make up that single response back to you. We have no idea how it's or like what patterns it's recognizing to generate that response. There's a whole field of research called explainability of AI that's looking into this so that we can improve the bias situation and improve those models. But currently, that's, in my mind, those are the biggest limitations that come from these models. That's why they hallucinate so much too.
And in the context of nutrition and food, this bias can play out in a lot of ways, in addition to what you said, where for some people things like cultural context or economic factors are going to be very important when it comes to nutrition choices, nutrition preferences, and what nutrition counseling would look like. So if it's using very generic data, it may not take those things into account. Another issue would be in the context of certain chronic diseases. So let's say something like kidney disease or chronic conditions like diabetes, gut health issues. It's also going to be hard for it to properly take these things into account sometimes when you're using something like an LLM, because it's just going to, like you said, it's training off of what's already out there. It's assuming what should be correct based on what is most often needed in somewhat similar situations, but it can miss things that might be obvious to maybe a trained professional, but not so much the machine itself, or to a user who is not as familiar with that field of health and nutrition. If you know what mistakes that you're looking for, then you can more efficiently spot it. But if you don't, then it can, in some instances, provide information that's either not appropriate due to bias, or even just dangerous, also in the context of certain chronic conditions. May not also address psychological factors, some of which again can be more harmful when, like, we think of things like disordered eating habits or relationships with food, but it may not consider other important psychological factors like someone's level of readiness to change, what types of steps they're looking to take next, and it's just going to assume those things unless otherwise very specifically prompted, or you're looking specifically for these types of potential problems.
I think you both captured that in a really excellent way. I think one of the things that came to my mind, which is kind of just a similar, just different way of saying it in a way, is uh, we look in our field, well, a lot of scientific fields, of course, being able to provide verification of the evidence base for something, and whether it's an intervention or a suggestion or a claim or something like this. Nathaniel, you noted that understanding, explaining the basically backing behind and what's going on behind the scenes with whatever tools being used, that then led to a certain output. I mean, one big thing in healthcare is being able to provide evidence for something, like I mentioned, intervention, suggestion, claim, whatever step we're taking. If we can't do that, if one, we don't, the person using it doesn't understand the evidence base enough to know if it is or is not an appropriate step to take, Or if, Matthew, like you said, you got to know what you're looking for. And if you don't know what you're looking for, you're probably going to take whatever the output is at face value, or you maybe not trust it altogether. You just won't even go down that path because you just don't know what is or is not legit. All of these factors are very much the case for a lot of stuff, even beyond the context of AI, like social media. There's such a wealth of information available that people can access at any time. One could view a YouTube account that you watch videos on of people talking about meal planning, for example. You could argue that that could be a source of information. There's still the same issues there. It lacks nuance. It's not personalized. If it is personalized, you don't know which elements were considered in its personalization, and all of these things, at least in its current state, it restricts us with what we can trust at least more consistently. Um, but I think this thing kind of goes back to one point, Nathaniel, that you mentioned, which is we got to be able to, we got to not, we got to look through whatever it's given us. We can't just trust it straight up and just, put an input in, take the output, and just go run with it right away. We got to check it. We got to make sure it's good. And if we don't know how to do that, then that's a pretty significant limitation for the average person that doesn't have an in-depth education in a certain area.
Exactly. Which, I mean, that goes for everybody though. It's not like I'm going into these models like I don't have that kind of healthcare expertise. I shouldn't be interpreting in that in with a medical with my medical knowledge. I should be checking with somebody who does as the expert human in the loop. And so kind of brings us back to our original question. Can AI replace healthcare providers? I was at a conference recently, and the biggest in the last 2 years at this conference, the biggest message that comes out of it is AI isn't going to replace anybody, but those who don't use AI will be replaced. And I think there's a lot of truth in that statement. And it's not just that like, oh, you need to use AI to not be replaced by AI. I mean, you need to learn how it improves your work, your efficiency in yourself, because then you'll be because everybody else is doing that too, essentially, right? Because anybody else who's becoming better is honestly using AI tools to be better.
Yeah, I like that. It's it's not without the human element, and you need a trained professional in order to be able to use any tool, much like any tool that we have that we can use in any field. But those that don't use it will probably fall behind. And I mean, we use tools in our industry, in any industry, to do more things, to do it quicker, to do it better, to make our lives easier. And to that I say, why would I make my life harder by not doing a thing? It doesn't make any sense. But at the same time, it's pretty obvious up to this point, at least in this episode. Hopefully we've given a sense of, well, yeah, that's probably the right answer. It's not going to replace, it's going to help. But I feel like we're quite far from that, for sure, of simply replacement. I think, Matthew, what do you, any thoughts from you before we wrap on that?
Yeah, and to wrap up this section, I would also say that something to consider is that when it comes to whether it be nutrition coaching, whether it be some other areas of health, it's generally not just the information that is needed. It's more than that, and these large language models and other forms of AI are a lot of the time just providing just simple information that in some instances, like we said, may have issues when it comes to accuracy. But even if it is accurate, health behavior change is a lot more than just having the right information. That is a starting point, it's not the end point. So that's another reason why that alone, I would say, is not going to serve as a replacement in itself, more of an augmentation, as we've said.
I know what to do. I have the knowledge. I just don't know what to do with it. And with that, why don't we leave that for the next episode, a little segue into part two, where we're going to talk about do's and don'ts. But hopefully, there was some little nugget that you got out of this for those that are watching and listening. Thanks for making it this far in the episode. Here's my, I should put this on the board behind me. We could talk about this for hours because it's a fascinating, fascinating topic. I think every topic that I talk about on this podcast is fascinating. So, Nathaniel, thank you for joining us and spending some time with us. I look forward to the next episode where we go into the do's and don'ts. Man, this is awesome. Thank you so much.
Me too. Thank you for having me. Great to talk with you guys and get your insights too.
All right, so we'll end our episode here for today. If you haven't checked out our previous episodes, please check them out. We're on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to or watch your podcasts, they're there. Please make sure to check out the next one we have coming up in part 2, where we talk about do's and don'ts of using AI in the nutrition and lifestyle space. But for now, we hope you have an excellent rest of your day wherever you are, and we'll talk to you very, very soon.